more easily. But we gradually started calling him Srila Prabhupada from that time.
Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamalam. A total of about 15 people who immediately after the festival moved into the temple in San Francisco. The temple was just a very narrow storefront with Dutch-style doors that Shyamsundar had built. So a great family environment. There was no Mangalarti in those days. There were no books in those days. So it was actually the power of the chanting of the holy name and the incredible charisma of the Rath Yatra festival that was drawing the devotees into the temple.
This is actually the second Rath Yatra festival in San Francisco. The first one, held in 1967, was just on the back of a rented truck, a Hertz truck. This is the first actual Rath Yatra in the Western world done with a cart, which Jayananda and myself built along with a couple of other devotees. We're bending redwood struts for the canopies. The entire cart was made out of redwood that we got very cheaply from a wrecking company which was demolishing old homes in San Francisco. And we sanded every board so that it looked like new wood. You can't find wood like this anymore. And we formed it over many weeks of effort in the parking lot next to the temple on Frederick Street. We built it purposely low to fit below the wires, and in those days they had electric trolleys still on the streets in San Francisco. In those days the carts were one of a kind. When the parade was finished, they were dismantled in place and the wood was hauled off and disposed of. And Malati and the other girls sewed the cloth covering.
That year was the first year that Lord Jagannath ever wore clothes. Srila Prabhupada told us that we had to make clothes for him, and he drew a little picture. And I remember Shyamsundar said he was like shocked. He goes, because he was very proud of how carefully he painted the deities. He goes, and cover up the paint job. But Jamuna and Harsharani, they immediately came to the grips with the task, making beautiful outfits and turbans.
The very, very first clothing or decoration that was given to Lord Jagannath was, of course, given by Srila Prabhupada. And that wasn't in June of 1968, but that was in December of 1967 when Srila Prabhupada returned from India after recuperation from his heart attack. And Srila Prabhupada came off the plane with his danda. First time we'd seen Srila Prabhupada with his sannyas raj. And hanging off of his sannyas raj was a little saffron pouch. And we thought how curious that was, because we thought that the rod you held in front of you, but Srila Prabhupada had this rod over his shoulder, and the little pouch was on the end. At any rate, we brought him to the Willard Street apartment. So when Srila Prabhupada sat down in the front room, he had his suitcases open. He had brought gifts for all the ladies. Every lady had a sari. And he brought our temple the first gift of a coconut grater. But in the little bag, he opened it up, unwrapped it, and unfolded it. And inside were 3 silken malas, the kind that you get at a deity store. For the small deities, of course, these are very, very thin, maybe 1/4 of an inch wide. But these malas that Srila Prabhupada bought were a good 1.5 inches thick. But because they were in this little bag, they were all crunched up. and actually quite unattractive looking because they'd been a little bit damaged. So naturally we had never seen anything like that. What was it? So Swamiji explained that these were decorations that we could offer to Lord Jagannath. And in fact, Lord Jagannath, we could even make clothes for him. So what kind of clothes would you make? Doesn't he already have clothes on? Isn't that what the painting is that's on the deity? No, he said, that's one kind of painting. You'll find deities will be sometimes painted, sometimes there'll be carving on the deities that will show that it's jewelry or clothing, but no, you can make clothes. So what kind of clothes do you make for a deity like Jagannath? So Prabhupada said, here's what you do. So he said he wears a turban, and he wears a shawl, and they wear like little skirt. So then he asked for volunteers who would sew. So Harsharani and Yamuna decided, well, we will volunteer. So for this 1968 Rath Yatra, we were working with the builders, and when they gave us the drawing, we had come up with this very, very handsome, already made and pleated series of umbrellas, almost like umbrellas that went around these outpourings of these cupolas in this wonderful bright cloth of saffron and gold. Now Jagannath, Subhadra, and Balaram were in red satin, and you can see the pictures of them. We even managed to get some wonderful garlands of fragrant flowers for this, red turbans.
Jayananda planned the car and built the car, and subsequently every year he was known as Mr. Rath Yatra. He would not sleep before the festival, and each year it improved the decoration from 1 car to 3. This was the first car that he built. It's so beautiful. This became and has remained a San Francisco tradition. On this day is a special day for Lord Jagannath, and this is acknowledged by the officials of San Francisco.
One very exciting thing about this Rath Yatra festival for me was this prayer, Gauranga Balite Habe Pulaka Sharira. This bhajan. This bhajan was the theme, practically, when there wasn't a kirtan going on by one of the disciples. This bhajan was played over a little megaphone system of Prabhupada singing it, and it sometimes played on the cart if somebody wasn't leading in between kirtans. At the end of the procession, when the cart was at the beach, this bhajan of Prabhupada played for hours and hours, the devotees said. I remember just the short time that I was at the beach, that when the wind would move back and forth, it would catch the sound of this magnificent prayer, and in my mind it's always been the theme of our 1968 Rath Yatra festival, of Lord Chaitanya's longing for Krishna. And I remember that when we were at an ocean kirtan one night, at the very end of the prayers, after he said Jaya Tulsi Devi, and he said, all glories to the Pacific Ocean. And we said, Hare Krishna. And he said, all glories to the Pacific Ocean. Hare Krishna, all glories to the Pacific Ocean. And he had his hands raised when he was facing the ocean. And it was I think it was the only time that I can remember Prabhupada adding something other than our classic prayers to the end of kirtan. But it moved us all. We were thinking how liberal Swamiji was, that he was appreciating the place that we were at and the majesty of it.
I was living in the Bay Area at the time, basically as a hippie. But I always had aspirations to understand transcendence. Therefore, I didn't really consider myself a hippie, but I considered myself a seeker. And when I heard that there was the Rath Yatra festival being held by the Hare Krishna devotees through Golden Gate Park in 1968, I made up my mind to try to get there. And I think I walked the whole way, which is why I ended up being late. So I must have walked several miles, because I came at the end of the festival and I saw Lord Jagannath looking out at the ocean. Now, I had visited the temple a few times, but it was the moment that I saw Lord Jagannath
gazing out into the ocean, that somehow some eternal quality was sparked. And at that moment, I became a devotee.
Long towards summer, Prabhupada went to Montreal, and I wrote to him and begged forgiveness for my offenses and told him I couldn't forget him, and couldn't forget Krishna consciousness, and I wanted to surrender to him. He wrote back and said, "Oh, my dear son, how have I ever lost you? I've been crying to Krishna, how have I lost Kirtanananda?" And he invited us to come and visit him in Montreal. We did, and he embraced me very warmly and said, "Now it is confirmed that we cannot be separated."
One morning, one of the devotees asked me to bring over some boga to Srila Prabhupada's, where he was staying, and so I walked over there with the groceries, and I knocked real softly on the door, and Himavati opened the door, just a little crack, and I handed her the boga, and the corner of my eye, when I looked down through the crack, I saw Srila Prabhupada sitting and chanting japa, and Srila Prabhupada asked Himavati, "Who's at the door?" And Himavati said, "Kanchabala came to bring boga." And then Prabhupada said, "Tell her to come in." So I came in, and I didn't expect it at all. It was just really a wonderful surprise, and I just like fell down, bowed down, and offered obeisances. And Prabhupada told me to sit down, and we chanted japa together. That was real nice.
So when Prabhupada came, they rented him a small room, and I got the opportunity to spend, or maybe it was 5 days with Prabhupada. And it was just a room, and it sort of had a little side alcove where there was a sink and a place where you could cook something. So I slept under that sink and in that area. The first night I was so nervous I couldn't sleep. About 1 a.m, I heard Prabhupada rustling and getting up. And he didn't turn on the light or anything. And he started chanting on his beads. So I wondered, what should I do? Should I get up or pretend I'm sleeping? I didn't know what I should do. So I didn't do anything. I pretended I was sleeping. But the next day the same thing happened. I was so nervous I couldn't sleep again. So when Prabhupada got up and started chanting, then I also made myself known. So Prabhupada, he turned on the light and he said, "Oh, you're up?" I said, "Well, Prabhupada, I'm so nervous I haven't been able to sleep." And he said, "Oh, that's good, very good." He said, I think sleeping is a waste of time." He said, "I don't like to sleep." He said, "And I don't like my disciples to sleep." Then he said, "Practically speaking, our aim is to make eating 0, sleeping 0, sex 0, and defense 0. We don't say that, but that is the aim."
The Montreal temple, was going very well, but we always had a difficult time paying the monthly rent. And there was some danger that they would lose the temple at one point because they just didn't have the rent money. And Prabhupada actually proposed the idea to me and Pradyumna that we should go out and meet people in the Indian community and explain to them that we're trying to establish this Radha Krishna temple here and maintain this temple, and that we would like their support and help. But in any case, Pradyumna and I didn't actually follow up that instruction. I think that we just didn't know how to go about doing it. But one thing that I did know how to do, I knew how to sort of go out and raise money at an airport. I mean, I was just a young boy, 17. I remember being short on my airline fare a couple of times, and I didn't know what to do. So I just started asking people, "Could you spare a buck? I'm, $5 short on my flight." And sort of miraculously, people were kind enough to give me a few dollars. And here I was, I had absolutely no skill. I went out and went to the airport, And I just started doing that, and I managed to raise a few $100s, and I gave it to the temple for the rent, and I wasn't even aware that Prabhupada knew about it, really. But about 4 or 5 years later, just out of the blue, Prabhupada said to me, he said, I remember when you raised the money to save the Montreal temple. And I was so touched to realize that Prabhupada had this memory of me, that I had done some service to help save the temple. And it just really surprised me, because I had no idea that Prabhupada was aware of that, or that he would remember that. I'll never forget, in so many ways, Prabhupada always expressed such kindness and love for his disciples.
Janardhan arranged one time for Prabhupada to go speak to the professors at McGill University. They had a faculty meeting or something, so Prabhupada went to join them for dinner. Prabhupada doesn't eat dinner with people who eat meat and stuff, but he said, I'm not supposed to do this, but he says, it's for preaching, I'll go. See, after Boston, Prabhupada went to Montreal, and he spent the whole summer there. Actually, he had to go there because his visa was finished, and he had to leave the country. And it was uncertain even whether Prabhupada would be able to ever return to the United States. And Allen Ginsberg was helping, Ramananda had Ginsberg working with lawyers to try to get his. And they said the only way he can do this is if he leaves the country. He has to leave the country to make a new visa application. And it has to be 3 months at least. So Prabhupada established in Montreal, and he said, it's okay. Doesn't matter, we get it, we don't get it, then I'll make Montreal the world headquarters. And a lot of devotees came up for the summer. And then it was under application. And then about in August sometime it came through. He got it.
This building is the first temple they had in Buffalo. It was LaSalle Avenue, not far from the university. I saw the devotees there, and they were advertising the Sunday feast, and I used to see them in some of the classrooms at night with cartels and burning incense, and I was very kind of curious about them. There was a class offered that was called Introduction to Vedic Literature. So Rupanuga presented this class on Krishna consciousness.
Rupanuga Prabhu had invited him because he was giving a Bhakti Yoga class at the university there, at the University of Buffalo. Srila Prabhupada stayed around a week. He was staying at Rupanuga Prabhu's house, and he gave lectures at different universities there, and also at the University of Buffalo, and he gave classes daily at the temple there. And as soon as I joined the temple, I had become a Pujari. Actually, they made me the head Pujari the day I moved into the temple, although I wasn't so sure what the names of the deities were. And I became the treasurer. I was a student at the University of Buffalo. I was also a devotee. We used to go with our full dhoti and tilak, shaven head, to school. But in the morning when I wasn't going to the university, I'd spend it with Prabhupada, listening to him. So I'd spend practically every morning with him. One time I was trying to see Prabhupada's effulgence because I was practicing Hatha Yoga, and Prabhupada immediately looked at me and he said, our method is bhakti and not mystic yoga. So then I could understand that Prabhupada was quite perceptive. He gave very nice instructions. One time he stopped when he was talking to us, because sometimes it would be for a period of time, maybe a couple of hours. So every once in a while he'd stop and pick up his beads and start chanting. He said, if you ever have time, then chant. I remember one instruction he gave me, he said that don't try and teach your godbrothers lessons. Prabhupada was giving one lecture at a university, and during that time one person crawled up to Prabhupada and said,
Prabhupada, how far down do you have to get in order to see God? How humble do you have to get, more or less? And he was crawling up to Prabhupada. Later on, he became initiated by Prabhupada. His name was Kushakrata Prabhu. It's quite an unusual personality at that time, but by Prabhupada's mercy and by the mercy of the Association of Devotees, he became a Sanskrit editor.
That record went everywhere, the first record of Hare Krishna. Nobody rehearsed it, and it went so smooth. The Happening record, there was a very hip station in those days. It's called WBAI. And there was a guy on it all night from 11 o'clock until 8 o'clock. And it was the most popular night station. I went up there with the record. He used to do Far Out Things, this guy. And he played it nonstop until the next morning, over and over. People called in and said, hey, that's cool, we love it, you know. And he did it.
He was talking about Krishna in the forest of Vrindavan. And he would close his eyes and he would get massage and he would talk about Krishna. And he would describe how they do not know Krishna is God. The cowherd boys are coming home from the forest and say, oh, mother, Krishna killed one very big demon today. Hey, Krishna is so wonderful. And they are not knowing he is God. They are simply thinking Krishna is so wonderful. And whenever he would talk like this, when he would stop, you wouldn't know where you were. You had been transported to some other loka. You have to remember your identity and who you were and where it was transporting. His power to transport you was there. And I got very addicted to that sweetness, that transcendental sweetness. One time he was talking about how there's no fear. Krishna is playing leapfrog with the boys. And they have no fear. They're just playing. And all of a sudden you experience no fear. And you realize you're always fearing. And you don't even know it, but in the back of your mind you're always fearing. And for a few moments you experience no fear. Kartikeya was telling me, it was such an amazing experience. For a few moments I felt fearless. And this way, when he would talk about Vrindavan, you would be there. He was in Leela. He was seeing everything. But you couldn't see it, but you could feel it. And so I got very addicted to that. So then when he went off to India, the whole time he was in India, I prayed to Lord Jagannath. Lord Jagannath, we had one murti in Montreal. I was there for 6 months. And I prayed, please let me take care of Swamiji when he comes back from India. So while Prabhupada was in India, he wrote me a letter. I wrote him a letter expressing that desire. He wrote me a letter back saying, I shall build a house in Vrindavan where you and your husband can come from all your days. At the end of the letter, he wrote, I know your mind. He knew everything I was thinking. He heard my prayers. He knew everything I was thinking. So when he came back, that desire was fulfilled. He allowed me to be with him, to serve him for that whole year, which was very sweet, because it was just in the time before the organization took off in a very big way. And at that time, Prabhupada was still kind of not completely well from his stroke. He was having some difficulty. So it was kind of like I would kind of mother him and he would kind of father us. We were like children, but we were like a family. Everything was out of love. And that's a rare, sweet time that I think he also thinks is very special.
I took this walk with Purushottam and Jadharani and Srila Prabhupada, and it was snowing, and there were a couple of teenage girls, young teenage girls, standing across the street, and they had on mini skirts, and like I said, it was snowing. So Jadharani and I naturally were glancing across the street thinking it was very odd for these two young teenage girls to have miniskirts on in the snow. And the teenage girls were looking across the street at Jadharani and I at having these saris on. So Srila Prabhupada noted the humor, and he said, "You are looking at them, and they are looking at you." He said, "Their austerity is for sex life, and your austerity is for Krishna."
Okay, it's the late summer of '68, the full nectarine, and Nayana Baram and I cooperated in making this film. He concentrated on the acting and the costumes and finding some of the sets. Most of the film was shot in the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, and here we have a devotee dressed up as Krishna. This particular aspect of the film earlier on had been a cause of some agitation because we had two brahmacharinis. These two brahmacharinis are supposed to be gopis. So we're showing a little scene from Vrindavan. Here's Radha and Krishna walking through the woods of Vrindavan. Before making this film, these same two brahmacharinis had been made up in the same way, and we had gone to the same place. We told Srila Prabhupada, who was not in New York at the time, what we had done with two devotees dressed up like Radha and Krishna and how we were worshiping them. And Srila Prabhupada blew his stack at us. He said that was the greatest offense of all. And we were just stricken with despair. But somehow we recovered, and Srila Prabhupada allowed us to do the same thing again later on for this movie, but with a new understanding that these people, of course, were not Radha and Krishna.
We took Prabhupada here for a stroll, and he said, "This is just like Vrindavan," and after that, we called the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens Brooklyn Vrindavan. He was talking about how all these desire to make parks, urban parks and botanic gardens, things like that, it's a sublimation of our desire to recreate Vrindavan. And we actually did do that by having this tableau. The two girls that played Radha and Krishna, they were actually sisters, Indira and Ekayani. Indira played Krishna and Ekayani, her sister, played Radharani. They lived outside the temple. After the girl that played Krishna took a bite out of the fruit, then we took it as prasadam. At the time, Damodar, I think he had been an underground filmmaker before he joined the movement. And I was studying filmmaking at Columbia University at the time. So Damodar and I worked together, and Prabhupada gave us an instruction that he wanted a movie made of the Bhagavad Gita, including battle scenes of the Mahabharata and elephants, and so he spent a whole session telling us how the movie should be made. Prabhupada said when the time comes he would direct it, and I never quite understood what he meant by that, maybe through Super Soul or whether he would do it personally. But he did speak at length about it. But he was very serious, and we took that instruction very seriously for some time, and Damodar and I used to go out of the temple and watch normal movies because we thought that would help us, or maybe we rationalized that way, that we could only fulfill Prabhupada's instructions by being cognizant with contemporary filmmaking.
And I remember Srila Prabhupada came down from his quarters, and we were all going to go to the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens together. So there was a car. I don't know how I got to ride in the car again, but I was in the back seat, and the two devotees dressed up like Radha and Krishna were in the back seat. Brahmananda was there, Srila Prabhupada was there, and a driver. And the devotee was dressed up like Krishna asked Srila Prabhupada if she could fan Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said no. The devotee never accepts service from Krishna. So he was playing along, though later we found out we were not doing the right thing. And also,
Before we got in the car, he had come down from his quarters and we were standing on the sidewalk. We had made enough garlands for Srila Prabhupada and Radha and Krishna. But one garland got lost or something, so we put a garland on Krishna and then went to put one on Srila Prabhupada. And as we were putting it on, he was taking it off and putting it on the devotee dressed like Radharani.
When Prabhupada saw how disappointed we were, he saved the situation by saying, well, I can understand by this impulse that you want to know about the spiritual world, Radha and Krishna, Goloka. I will explain it to you. And then he just sat down and he started reciting the Brahma Samhita prayers and gave a very elaborate explanation of those prayers, the Chintamani Dham, and Radha and Krishna, how they look, how they appear, what they do. He transported us to Goloka by his consciousness. When he finished, we were leaving Brooklyn Botanical Gardens. Prabhupada ordered me, this place is very nice, and this will make a very nice location for a temple. And we want to build a temple. So you arrange to get this land donated. We'll make it a very nice temple. But Prabhupada had such a high vision that he would try for. So I had to do it. This park is a municipal park by the city of New York.
The film Guru Dev was shot in the spring of 1969. We were waiting for Srila Prabhupada to arrive in New York at the airport. The chair was prepared for him, a Vyasasana of sorts, and everybody was gathered. United flight came in. The kirtan got ecstatic. There's Subal, there's Kanchan Bala and Leela Sukha. And Srila Prabhupada arrived. Of course, there was a great deal of commotion. I couldn't get right at him immediately, but there he is, walking down the aisle. And of course, a furious kirtan going on. Everybody else in the airport wondering what was happening. Srila Prabhupada is arriving from Los Angeles. These airport arrivals were certainly the most ecstatic and intense times because we had been away from him, he had been away from us, and the preparations were frantic and everybody's rushing out to get there on time and waiting, and the plane arrives, and then Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet make their landing on our ground, and we were so happy. The camera that I used couldn't compensate for the strong lighting in back of Srila Prabhupada, so when I was at that angle, you get a silhouette. I tried to get that word united on the tail of the plane in the shots because once again we were united with Srila Prabhupada, and that was our life.
And now he's sitting there in New York, and he said things like, you could chant any name of God, either Allah or any name of God that's bona fide. But because we're followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we chant the Hare Krishna mantra.
There was a whole bunch of us waiting at this one gate, and all of a sudden somebody saw Prabhupada coming from this other gate. And he said, oh, Srila Prabhupada's coming from over there, and we all ran to greet Srila Prabhupada. And we fell down at his lotus feet. I was a new devotee, you know, so I didn't know how long you're supposed to stay down. So I stayed down for quite a while, and then I kind of peeked my head up to see if everybody had gotten up yet. Everyone was up, and Prabhupada was standing right over above me. I looked up into his lotus eyes, and he went and patted my head. So I got up. So that was my first memory of Prabhupada. I was initiated by mail probably a few months before he had come to New York.
Between the heads and shoulders of the people just in the terminal, I caught intermittent glimpses of Prabhupada. I had never seen him, his actual form, and I was, my senses were not very disturbed. I had not been a drug taker. I maybe experimented with each of the available drugs at the time once, but otherwise I was a trained observer, physiology labs and so on. But I was certain he was not walking like an ordinary person. If you look at their head, it would be sort of bobbing. He was moving smoothly like a swan or other water bird floating on the water. That was my first glimpse of him. And at that time, actually, I saw, he was effulgent. And that was the first time I'd ever seen any effulgence like that. It was real. I hadn't had any vision like that in dreams or any religious experiences like that. It was as real as I see this door. And as I say, I was a trained observer. And then paid obeisances and rising up from the obeisances, I looked up and he was looking at me with that penetrating look that gave the one being looked at the understanding that this great personality sees our soul. In retrospect, we were so receptive. You see such nice faces, as Prabhupada says, but actually we had no position, no power, no use until Prabhupada joined us to him.
But I remember one time when I did go to the airport with Prabhupada and I was distributing prasadam, and we were having a kirtan, and the airport authorities made us stop. And I was at first distributing prasadam to the non-devotees who were onlooking. When they stopped our kirtan, Prabhupada was a little bit peeved, and he told me to come over with the prasadam and distribute the prasadam to the devotees instead of to the onlookers. And he said, charity begins at home. You see those garlands, they were all gardenias. And we heard from the devotees on the west coast that Prabhupada liked gardenias because they were very fragrant. So I used to buy the flowers for the temple, and we used to go to the flower shops and buy day-old gardenias, which were cheaper. Even though they were cheaper, they were more fragrant because I think Prabhupada had mentioned that a flower smells sweetest when it's dying. They weren't as fragrant when they were fresh, but they were more fragrant when they were older. And Prabhupada said that the flowers that didn't have a fragrance were useless Kali Yuga flowers, so therefore he liked gardenias. Whereas some of those carnations that we put in this garland were not very fragrant.
Srila Prabhupada got in the car in the airport and went back to Manhattan. Srila Prabhupada's apartment was still at 26 2nd Avenue. And the devotees had repainted it and refinished it, and redid the floors, so it was all gleaming and beautiful. Srila Prabhupada walked up the stairs. His apartment was on the 2nd floor. And as he looked in the door into the apartment, he turned to us and said, "My old home." And that really made us happy. And we had painted the ceiling blue to look like the sky. And it was a wonderful reunion.
I remember that globe that Prabhupada had in his room in 26 2nd Avenue. And I remember one time I was there with Prabhupada, and he looked at the globe. I think he may have spun it a little bit. And he said, if they only knew my plans, they would put me away. They would lock me up. Because he was talking about plans to expand the movement all over the world. And at that time, there were no branches in foreign countries. And it was just kind of like a joke. Somebody would go to Russia, somebody would go to China, somebody would go to England. And we'd all used to dream about it. We never really thought that the movement would expand beyond the hippie enclaves in New York and San Francisco and some college campuses. And even then, there was one college campus in Buffalo that Rupanuga Prabhu was running a center at, which was very successful. But we never really dreamed that Hare Krishna would be popular with college students because we thought it would only appeal to dropouts. I never thought that the movement was going to expand beyond the counterculture. And 61 Second Avenue, before we took it over, was a tuxedo parlor. So we retained those three-way mirrors and made alcoves out of them, and I think we put the Vyasa sign in one of the alcoves. There was one letter where Brahmananda wrote to Prabhupada about the tuxedo palace, and he still called it a palace, when it was hardly a palace. Prabhupada wrote one of the letters, Brahmananda has found me a palace.
The New York devotees had just acquired this new temple, the second New York temple at 61 Second Avenue. And they were writing to Prabhupada telling him that the new temple was just like a palace. And I was feeling a lot of anxiety about this because I was thinking, Prabhupada's coming and he's going to be so disappointed when he sees this temple. They're telling him it's just like a palace, but it's just another storefront. It's a little bit nicer than the first storefront, but it's just another storefront. And I was thinking he's going to be angry, he'll be so disappointed, it's going to be horrible. And so Prabhupada came in and he sat on the Vyasasan and he said, I prayed to Krishna to send me one moon, but Krishna has sent me so many moon-like boys and girls. That's what he said.
I remember one lecture Prabhupada gave there. He began saying Om Jnana Timirandasya, and then he just stopped. Timirandasya, and he just lectured on that. He had his Bhagavatam open to lecture on the Bhagavatam verse, but he didn't lecture on that verse. He lectured on Om Jnana Timirandasya. He didn't go beyond that. The importance of the spiritual mastery. There was one gentleman, an elderly gentleman, who walked one day into the temple, and he had a letter from Prabhupada. And the letter said that, Dear Mr. Such and Such, so when I come to New York, you can come see me. Okay. Brahmananda had me take him over to Prabhupada's apartment, a block or so away. And the man was very respectful. He was connected with a yoga society in New York. He said to Srila Prabhupada, Swamiji, I like your movement very much, but one thing is that one of your disciples said that Swami such and such is a rascal. And it always seemed to me that he was a very holy man, and I don't understand why your disciple would say that you said that he's a rascal. And Prabhupada said that, who has said this? And the man said, you didn't say? Prabhupada said, if they say that I have said, and I have not said, then they are rascal. And then the man was pacified. Prabhupada said a few things, and Prabhupada pulled a book out of his bookshelf, a small hardbound blue book, and opened it up and gave it to the man. He said, you know this book? The man looked at it, oh, Swami such and such, Dr. such and such, oh, Vedanta Society, oh yes. And he was quite pleased at seeing something that he was familiar with. And Prabhupada opened it up and he said, read the translation. The man read the translation. Always think of me, devote yourself to me, worship me, offer your homage to me. Prabhupada said, yes, he has done it nicely. He is a very good scholar. Then the commentary, what does he say? The man began reading. It is not to Krishna that we have to surrender, but to the unborn, impersonal something something. Prabhupada said, just see. Therefore I say they are all rascals. And then Prabhupada began explaining why such persons were rascals. He quoted, of course, Namam Duskrita Namudha Prapadyante Naradama Maya Pratyajnana Asura Bhavamashita. That they're the miscreants, lowest of mankind. Their knowledge is stolen by illusion. They're demonic. Because just see, Krishna is saying me and they're saying not Krishna. Therefore I say. Then Prabhupada said that sometimes strong words are needed to arouse a sleeping man. And then Prabhupada said, anyway, it is not my saying, it is Krishna saying. And Prabhupada gave a dismissive sort of shrug. He said, what can I do? Prabhupada did one initiation at 61 2nd Avenue. So Prabhupada was walking to his apartment. And there's still a photo of Srila Prabhupada walking, surrounded by devotees chanting and dancing. And they're having a really ecstatic kirtan. The fire yajna is completed, everybody's initiated, people have their names. And Prabhupada's walking back to his apartment with his usual aristocratic gait, with his head slightly raised. Everyone's chanting. Prabhupada didn't say anything. Then Prabhupada just said, we have increased the disciplic succession from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
There were these girls that, in the New York temple. They were living at home, and they would come to the temple. They were going to high school, and they were really nice girls. Prabhupada wanted them to stay in school and stay with their families, and they would come to the temple. And I was more of a hippie. I had left home. I was in a different situation. So these girls, when Prabhupada would come, they seemed very juvenile to me, but they really loved Prabhupada. And when he would come, they would scream and treat him like a rock and roll star. I was really quite embarrassed by it, but they were very loving and very devoted. So Prabhupada would come in and they would go, Swamiji, Swamiji, and scream and yell. And then at one point Prabhupada called them into his room and he said, you are the children of the society, so therefore you must be very grave.
Saradiya and I were married in May of '69, and shortly thereafter I returned to New York because I was studying bookbinding at the time to help set up the ISKCON Press. And I was very stunned when I was told that Prabhupada wanted us to stay in his quarters. There was an apartment behind 26 2nd Avenue. Those were considered the most holy places by all of us because that was where Prabhupada had his rooms. And although Prabhupada was not there in New York at the time, those were Prabhupada's rooms. And yet Prabhupada instructed that me and Saradiya, having just recently been married and needing a place to stay, should stay in his rooms. And that deeply impressed me that he was willing to suggest that. And indeed we did stay there. We stayed there for probably a month or two in the summer of '69.
He was looking around the room on one of these evenings and he said, I want each one of you to open a temple. I want each and every one of you to open a temple. And because I'm a very impetuous person, and I was more impetuous then because I was only 16 years old. So I said, even the girls, Swamiji? He said, yes, why not? There is no difference. And he said, in Nityananda's absence, Janava Devi was preaching like anything. There is no difference between boys and girls. That was very sweet.
I was very late for my wedding. Srila Prabhupada was going to marry Advaita and I that day. And I walked in and I had my hair down, which I didn't know you weren't supposed to do. And Srila Prabhupada, he looked at me and he said, Balai is looking like the goddess of fortune. And then he married us. And after the marriage ceremony and the installation ceremony, Srila Prabhupada was sitting on the Vyasasana and he was eating a popper. And he broke the popper into several pieces and he said, all glories to the provider of prasadam, all glories to the preparer of prasadam, and all glories to the eater of prasadam.
Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai。Hare Krishna，亲爱的家人们，今天咱们播放的圣 Prabhupada 的传记纪录片《追随圣 Prabhupada》第2集就到这里结束了。那接下来我们花一点时间，一起搅拌一下我们聆听以及观看的甘露，好吗？首先问大家一个问题啊，首先大家可不可以用2-3个词先表达描述一下自己观看的这个感受？2-3个词啊，君伟曼丽说好感动，意犹未尽，精彩。好，我看到了大家表达的自己观看的感受，说看不够，很激励人心，很甜美，很生动，很喜乐，很被吸引，很净化。是的，我不是第一次看了，但是这次看，每一次看都不一样的。好，那接下来我有几个比较简单的问题，我想问一下大家，看看大家是不是都捕捉到了这些细节啊？大家谁记得圣 Prabhupada 喜欢什么花儿？栀子花儿，对，是的，是的。我忘记是不是今天的 DVD 还是另外一个。听说奉献者们当圣 Prabhupada 到的时候，奉献者们就会给圣 Prabhupada 做栀子花环。还有一个问题，也是一个细节问题，哪位奉献者被称为弹车先生 Mr. Rathayatra？ 谁知道那位奉献者的名字？加亚南达，太棒了 Hare Krishna， 谢谢大家的专注的聆听。还有一个就是，他们应该也是在哪里？就是在海边唱诵 Kirtan 的时候，在结束的时候，圣 Prabhupada 加了一个传统祷文之外的一个新的祷文，是什么？一切荣耀归于太平洋。对，好，就是简单的几个问题，就是想看看大家是不是都听到了。当然了，字幕是有点快，我们也在想办法怎么办呢？但也不能太慢，和画面不同步，也不行。大家可以帮忙想想看有没有别的办法啊，我们再改善。那接下来大家可以自由分享今天聆听和看到的内容有哪些触动到大家的，或者说哪些地方就是某一些内容或者教导能运用到我们自己的休息当中的，给我们激励的，大家可以自由分享，也可以打开麦克风，举手打开麦克风来分享。字也太小了，字太小了是吧？好，我们想想办法，看剩下的是不是可以再大一点。圣恩对门徒的仁慈和爱，有没有什么具体的例子呀？我们可以回顾一下。第一倍播放就是放慢速度是吗？我回头试一下。是忙着看字幕看不到Prabhupada爷爷的表情，是这确实也是个问题。我们想想看。雪英曼内说，我们的目标是把吃睡访味交配降为0。对，当时一位奉献者有回忆这一部分。当然，通常是他不会这么要求，但是他会提醒我们的目标是这样的，不会因为我们暂时做不到就忽略这个目标，目标还是应该清晰的啊。Gopriti Mani 说，圣 Prabhupada 说应该念诵使徒传系所给予的曼陀，为 Krishna 苦行。 维克什纳苦行这个是怎样的一个情节呢？能复述一下吗？大家是不是打不开麦呢？好，现在大家都可以，如果想打开麦克风讲的，可以自己打开了，大家可以举一下手。为生活苦行，为 Krishna 苦行。帕布帕说为他们苦行是为了性，你们苦行是为了 Krishna。对，两位妈的去看到，两个非奉献者女性，她们穿的非常的性感，非常的在那么冷的天，她们觉得很可笑。圣帕帕看到了他们的心态，就说你们穿纱丽苦行是为了 Krishna。航航妈那说，有时要唤醒一个人，说点重话是有必要的。对，这是帕布帕的原话。狗温的祈祷了1周，希望能照顾帕布帕。帕布帕听到了他的愿望。是的，两位妈的就说，圣恩把花还给了 Radharani 的扮演者。这一段也是很有趣的，也是很甜美。Gopriti 妈就说 ，Prasadam 应该先给奉献者，而不是给围观者。帕布帕爷爷会给女门徒带纱丽，作为礼物。对的，这一段是非常感人，给每一位女士带了纱丽。我看有没有Simha 是帕布吗？是帕布吧？举手的奉献者可以打开麦来讲。Hare Krishna， 我看到一位叫 Simha 的帕布吧，举手了，您可以打开麦直接讲啊。打不开，不会呀。现在可以了。
OK， 哈利波，打开了。是这样，那个我听了之后呢，就是我看这个视频啊，那个有一个建议给大家，就是说那个不知道能不能大家下次听的时候，不要在播放的时候那个打字，尽量的不要。那个开始可以，还有那个结束可以，因为这样它本身速度是跟这个说话的速度是同步的。这个同步的速度呢是非常快，本来大家看起来就眼睛就只能盯着字幕一边听。其实那个我也建议大家不用太那个在意这个画面，因为画面它不一定是完全描述那个跟语言完全吻合的，只是一个大概的一个场景。那个，但我更关键，我个人那个理解就是每一个奉献者、施拉帕帕这些门徒，他们的谈话更重要，他们说的非常的朴素。没有那种装的那种那个套话呀、场面话呀，那个弄的那个很圆滑什么的没有，他们非常实在。包括那个开始的那个古文的马塔吉，他当那些帕布都得到第2次启迪，他没有启迪的时候，他特别的闹情绪。对，因为他肯定还不知道 Krishna 直觉是什么，但那会儿是真的他不知道是什么。施拉帕帕也没有那么教，施拉帕帕肯定最初的时候告诉他们是更多的解释 Krishna 是谁。所以呢，就是那么他闹那种情绪，我觉得是非常真实、非常重要的，而且他本人谈出来的，我觉得是非常伟大。因为我们最初的时候都是那么差的，这个是真实的。所以呢，我们应该向他们学习这样真实的东西。因为在我们这个国家这个文化当中，大家说话的时候就是特别的装，特别的那个场面，哎呀，就生怕说错话。我觉得这是很有问题的。大家都藏着自己的那些缺点，想一些办法不让你看到我的缺点，这个不是很好。所以说这是我给大家的，我听的这个的感受是非常好，非常这个翻译我觉得太真实，太对了，太有意思了，而且让我们可以反复的听，特别有意思。非常感谢你们那个翻译，谢谢大家。
Hare Krishna，谢谢 Sinha Prabhu。对，我一开始没播放前就有提醒大家，每一次有提醒大家，我们有什么话，我们先说完，有什么问题我们先讨论完，然后我开始播放了就不用打字了。有什么因为我会试播1分钟，确保声音和画面都是有的，我才会播放。播放的过程当中，如果听不到或者说是没图像，那肯定是您自己的问题，要自己检查一下设备。所以中间咱就不打字了，好不好？谢谢跑步的提醒。刚刚说的确实，奉献者们呈现的状态很纯真、很真实、很可爱，对不对？真实的把自己的问题、自己当时的状态表现出来，也有机会去成长。对，
特别特别好，谢谢谢谢。
谢谢跑步。还有家人要分享吗？举手或打字都可以啊。大家写在这里的有重复的，我就不念了就是有一些画面，我能理解大家的心情，就是想要也看到圣帕布帕的每一个表情、每个动作。我也是，就是看着就眼睛不想离开。那这个以后我想是会实现的。等我们把这些视频中版做出来以后，我们会放到一个平台上，大家再自行去按照自己的速度去看。不过需要点时间，希望大家容忍啊。雪英马德基，您可以打开话筒。
好的，我想分享一下。刚才那个帕布说的，我很同意，就是我也是有这种感受哈，就特别真实。这个表述哈，奉献者的表述特别真实，特别感人。我看的主要的感受，总体来说就是感觉到圣帕帕德的那个仁慈，对奉献者的仁慈。他有几个地方，一个是说，唱诵的时候在太平洋边，他说所有荣耀归于太平洋。然后奉献者就很受到鼓舞哈。然后还有就是说，当那个帕帕德从印度回来的时候，那个奉献者给他那个把他的那个故居做了一定的那个装修哈，他就特别感动，他就说像宫殿一样。然后他到另一个地方，他就说那个是雅穆纳是谁啊？我没记清啊。那奉献者他说他特别忐忑哈，他说我觉得那个像宫殿，然后我这块就是不太好，感觉很那个简单一个店面。但是帕帕德来了以后说，奎什纳，我是祈祷派来一轮明月，结果他给我派来了明月般的男孩和女孩。
对，很多人
就是哎呀，就觉得圣人的仁慈哈，对奉献者的这个爱呀，对门徒的爱和仁慈。还有一处就是说，他说所有荣耀归于那个帕萨纳的准备者、制作者和荣耀者，就是这些感觉就是特别的那个有爱，特别仁慈。还有女孩子追星一样的，这像追摇滚明星一样的追随帕布帕德，就是特别感人的那种感觉。还是可以是那，我就说到这儿。
都很真实的。
对，
好，谢谢雪英马德基。哎呀，我就倒着读啊，我读我刚刚看到的。廖维妈那说，每一个人都要出去开一个庙宇，女孩子也一样，为什么不能呢？什么哈巴的这么说，男孩和女孩没有区别，在传播方面。好，下面去那妈你说，当基尔坦南达回来时，圣哈巴身为灵性父亲，对门徒强烈的爱、仁慈和包容，真的是很感动。我不知道具体的当时的历史情况是怎样，是 Kirtananda Maharaj 是离开一段时间还是怎样，好像有这么一个情节，我不确定了。我记得那个当时是妈妈是指说，亲爱的儿子，我一直向 Krishna 哭喊，我怎么能失去 Kirtananda？ 真的很感动。还有谁？大家要想分享的可以举手，打字都可以。静心瑜伽说，帕布帕说，所有的城市都是毁灭、创造，然后创造、毁灭这样的反反复复。那不讲话的时候都静音一下啊。帕布说，所有的城市都是毁灭、建造、毁灭、建造，而他们只做传播 Krishna 之觉。对，所有都在创造、毁灭、创造、毁灭。我们应该创造或者建立，英文用的是同一个词 create relationship。 with Krishna， 应该重建和 Krishna 的关系，这是唯一我们应该去建的东西。抱歉啊，大家看一下自己的麦，尽量关一下。好，还有没有？我挑着读一些啊。Prabhupada 说他不喜欢睡觉，他觉得睡觉是浪费时间，他也不喜欢让门徒睡觉，应该把这些物质的躯体的需求降到最低。至少我们应该有这样的目标。正如说他把自己的房子给门徒结婚用，为他们主持婚礼。是的，圣恩记得门徒为庙宇筹款。对，那位奉献者自己都不知道，圣帕帕居然听说了这个事情。已经过了4-5年，Prabhu还记得你曾经筹款保住了蒙特利尔的庙。圣 Prabhupada Krishna 都不会忘记我们做的任何一个服务。下面是哪里说圣 Prabhupada 无论在哪里就被转生为 Gloka Vrindavan。对，今天的视频当中不止一次提到圣 Prabhupada 有这样的转化的力量，他通过他的知觉把我们带到了 Gloka Vrindavan。大家还记得吗？有一个地方那个描述的奉献者忘记是谁了，说我们听他描述Vrindavan的情况听得上瘾，当时用的那个英文词是 addicted。 我想起来曾经有人问圣帕帕什么是真正的灵性导师，圣帕帕回答说真正的灵性导师是对 Krishna 上瘾的人。这个好像在觉悟自我的科学里面有。好，但还有吗？刚刚咱们没有分享过的一些点。还有吗？他的万圣的训练员的记说，他的眼神如此有穿透力，他能看穿每个灵魂。是的。Rasika Gopika Mani 说，圣 Prabhupada 的仁慈和爱、慈悲和祝福正在负责着整个宇宙。正由于 Prabhupada 的仁慈和爱，让我们这些卡利年代堕落的众生有了希望和光明，有了这个卡利年代唯一的解药和救赎。他是那么的细心和温柔的对待门徒，记着门徒给他蒙特利尔的庙的房租，在机场筹钱付了房租，帕帕都记得。是的，也许我们都不记得了，但 Prabhupada 记得， Krishna 记得。还有吗？没有香味的花儿是无用的卡利年代的花儿。对，还有吗？大家还记得有一个情节吗？就是有一个人说他是训练有素的观察者，他很有洞察力。他说他自己嘛，对，航航们也补充了，圣帕帕走路的样子跟普通人是不一样的，是那么的平稳，就像天鹅一样，而且它是闪闪发光。那位奉献人说他是头一次看到那样的光彩。好，什么是那玛丽说圣帕帕是如此耐心谦卑，最后终于让门徒发现 Swamiji 是三流的称呼。是啊，都被叫了那么久，他没有主动去纠正。我们可以想象，如果Govinda Dasi不去追问什么是最好的，圣帕帕可能一直会接受这个三流的称呼。是不是说那个女孩是他的母亲？这个也不太清楚啊，我也记不清楚这个细节了。大家还有吗？还有哪些触动到大家的，或者给予一些启示的？白鹤良马尼说，我们壮大了柴坦尼亚的使徒传系。 还有吗？抱歉，我自己说太多了，大家还有要分享的吗？继续举手也可以。还有，我印象中，抱歉，我想听听大家说。我在看的时候也记了不少笔记，所以大家不说的话，我就会控制不住的想说。好，还有2分钟时间，我想听听大家的分享。那维玛内说他的行李箱就是办公桌。对，是马湾生活是那么的简朴。Loka Mangalamani 说他的眼神具有穿透力。好，非常好。还有吗？大家没有什么要分享的了吗？不要教导自己的神兄弟。对，雪姨妈说不要教导自己的神兄弟。Hadith 说 rascal 的部分，您还记得一些细节吗？重点的细节。它自带光芒，是的。有一个地方也描述到说，他一举一动都沉浸在狂喜中，而秘诀在于唱诵时的祈祷。祈祷 Krishna 总是把我置于对你的奉爱服务的社团中。说不上来了。扮演 Radha 和 Krishna 跳舞为什么是冒犯？这个我没有办法去，我不知道，我们可以请教一下灵性导师，我们可以保留这个问题啊。我把这个问题记下来。好。这个问题，对，可以。大家在观看的过程当中有什么问题的话，可以提出来，我把它记录下来。我会问一位灵性导师们，然后下一次的时候我们再回答大家，好吗？或者咱们线上有年长的奉献者也可以回答。大家还有要分享的吗？新哈帕布，您是刚刚重新举手，还是刚才举的手？看到圣玛须纳尔玛尼说，圣帕帕将年幼的女门徒视为是母亲，她的心是如此纯真、柔软、谦卑，她能看透每一位灵魂。Lakshmana Mani 说，我记得视频里说，因为演员不是真的主本人。细节我记不清了，好像是就是说他们在扮演，然后其他奉献者就真的像崇拜 Krishna 一样开始就是崇拜他们了。我不太确定啊，我到时候可以问一下，或者我再看一下那个细节。录音在哪里呀？我们还没有上传。好，还有吗？在刚开始的时候，我记得还有一个印象比较深的，就是圣帕瓦说，如果豺狼荣耀你，你能得到什么好处？就是提醒我们不去贪恋，那些就是物质层面的，或者说是很肤浅的、廉价的一些荣耀。 是的，什么是那曼尼说，施拉帕说，我们是一家人。悠悠云曼尼说，我们像母亲一样照顾他，他像父亲一样照顾我们。我们看到门徒和灵性老师之间的这种互相的关爱，互相的爱护。好，那如果大家没有别的分享了，我们今天就到这里结束了。以后的播放时间会固定在周日晚上的7点。希望大家能够继续奔走相告，告诉更多的奉献者，我们这个播放的节目，让更多的奉献者来一起荣耀圣普拉布帕的。好，谢谢大家 Hare Krishna， 非常感谢大家一起来观看，一起荣耀圣帕布帕的。对了，大家就是非常欢迎大家一起来轮流做这个主持。带动大家一起分享好吗 ？Hare Krishna， 谢谢大家，晚安。Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai。
Recording stopped.